handling the brush and working with ink and composition and balance, all these things, thinking about all these things at once can be very, very, very challenging. Hello, my name is Lucas Perez. I'm the Education and Public Programs Assistant at the San Diego Museum of Art, and today I'm going to give you an introductory course on Japanese calligraphy. Japanese calligraphy is something that I've been studying for over a decade now. 6 of those years were in Tokyo, Japan, and in 2017 I became the rank of Shihan, which is loosely translated as Master Teacher, but you can just call me Lucas. My lesson today is going to be comprised of 2 parts. We're going to talk about the history, and then we're going to do the hands-on fun part, right? So let's do the history first. Where did Japanese calligraphy come from? The short answer to that is that it came from China. It was imported by way of Korea in the 5th century and became part of the traditional Japanese arts known as the do. There are different kinds of do, like kendo, which is the way of swords. There's karate-do, way of flying hands. There's sado, which is the way of tea making. And there's shodo, which is the way of writing. Because they belong to the same philosophical basket of ideas, there's a lot of analogies between kendo and shodo, which is the way of sword fighting and the way of calligraphy, or way of writing, I should say. So you'll see that these things are kind of analogized often. Chinese calligraphy itself is thousands of years old, and the characters that it's based upon can be dated back to 6500 BC. The early origins of Chinese characters was mysterious until the 19th century when a Chinese scholar discovered that traditional medicine shops were selling these things called dragon bones. They were basically oxen bones and tortoise shells that were inscribed with what he recognized to be the very, very early forms of the Chinese characters we know today. They were dated back to the Shang dynasty, which was around 1200 BC. And essentially what these things were is that king or lawmakers or whoever would inscribe a question on there about the outcome of a battle, about the future of a crop, whether or not the crops were going to be good this year. They would inscribe these questions on the bones, and then a soothsayer would throw the bone into the fire and it would crack, and they would read the cracks, and that would be a way of telling the future. This early oracle bone script was later developed into what's called the seal script, and this is an example of this seal script today, and the seal script is still in use today. You'll see that it's used very often in name stamps. Name stamps are used often in East Asia in place of signatures. From this script was developed the script that we know today, which is the in Japanese known as kaisho, or the block style script, and we all know this script. It became systematized. There was a clear way of writing these things so that they became less pictographic and they became more systematic. A little funny note on the character right here, this very complicated one in the middle, that is the character for Bebe, and that is supposed to imitate the sound of people slurping noodles. And it's also known as one of the most complicated characters, Chinese characters in the character set. I think it has something like 50 or 60 strokes to it, so it's incredibly difficult to write. Okay, let's get into the second part of this video where I'm going to teach you how to do some calligraphy. But first, let me tell you where you can pick up all your supplies. There's a fantastic store called Daiso. It's a Japanese 99-cent store that has several locations throughout San Diego. You can pick up everything you see here for less than $35. So let's do everything that you need. Let's go through everything you need, rather. Okay, you're going to need some paper. This is called hanshi size paper. It's a little larger than computer paper, and this is the size that I use every day for practice. You're going to need some calligraphy ink. I highly recommend bottled ink for beginners rather than the ink sticks. Grinding the ink sticks is a whole nother sort of talent and skill unto itself. I don't think that beginners should really start messing with that. So stick with the bottled ink. You want to make sure that it is actually sumi ink, which is, again, Japanese calligraphy ink. It's a little bit different than India ink. India ink will not work in this circumstance. You're going to need a brush, obviously. Your brush the nib needs to be no longer than 1.5 inches long. If it's any longer, it might be a little difficult for you to maneuver. This is optional, but I have it because it's nice to keep the brush off the table. So basically, it's called a fudeoki. it's a place to set down your brush. It's kind of very decorative. You're going to need something to put your ink in. I use these little white dishes because they're a little easier to clean than the ink stones, the black ink stones. I also find that when you're mixing or diluting ink, you can tell how thick it is on the white plate. It's very difficult to tell on the black ink stone. Everything looks black, so you can't tell how thick it is, right? You're going to need a bunchin, which is essentially a paperweight. You could use any old paperweight at home that you might have. You're going to need a little water pot, and you could use a little shot glass, whatever, just something to pour a little water if the ink gets kind of thick. And you're going to need a shitajiki, which is basically a piece of felt, and the felt is going to keep the ink off of your table. It'll absorb any excess ink so that you won't have any problems with it sticking to the table or staining your table, which is a little bit more destructive, right? And the last and most important ingredient in your setup is coffee or tea. As I was mentioning earlier, sado and shodo are mixed into the same philosophical basket, so you must have tea, you must have coffee. I'm more of an iced coffee guy, so I have my iced coffee here. So whenever I used to practice in Tokyo with my teacher and my cohorts, we always drank tea. It was a big part of the process, okay? In addition to these basic materials, I also recommend this book. It's a fabulous book. I use this constantly. It's 250 essential Japanese kanji characters. This will give you where the pictographic origins that we were discussing earlier came from, and you can get a sense of how these characters should look based on that pictographic origin. Let's take a look at 3 characters that I'm going to teach you, basic characters I'm going to teach you today in the book itself. Let me go ahead and go to the overhead camera. So these diagrams are the reason why I like this book. This is the character I'm going to teach you first today, which is Nichi, the character for sun or for day. And you could see its early pictographic, sort of universally understood pictographic form, and then how it got abstracted and then systematized and into a geometric form that we know today. So this is, again, how sun developed. If we're going to look at something, for example, like water, here's another one. You could see this is the contemporary version, and then how it's been simplified over time or systematized. The basic way that you write these things is from left to right, up and down. And I know that seems simple on these types of characters, but when they get more complicated, that's a little bit harder than it sounds. And then the last character I'm going to teach you today is kin or kane, which is the character for gold. And you could see here the early pictograph represents 2 nuggets of gold under a mountaintop. And then it got, again, made into a sort of geometric writing style here into the version that we know today. So those are the 3 characters I'm going to teach you today. But before we get to that, let me go ahead and show you how to fold your paper. It usually comes in packs of 60 when I get it from Daiso. You're going to pull out, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 sheets, maybe even 5. You don't want to pull out too many. If you pull out too many sheets and try to fold them, what will happen is that the crease lines will be too faint on the inner portion, on the paper, on the inside, basically, so that it'll be difficult to see what you're doing. So we need to fold this into 6 boxes. So what we'll do is we'll first fold this in thirds. And this is a little bit of a skill into itself. So it's going to be, again, folded into thirds like that. And you're going to just, I wouldn't, when you're folding and creasing, don't crease too hard. So we don't want a really faint crease, but we don't want like a sharp crease also. We want just kind of a medium, just perfect kind of crease. So we've got our 3 rows here. And now we're going to fold this in half again, lengthwise like this. And then fold it in half one more time. And that'll give you your center line that you're going to be able to kind of, I don't know, can you see that? Let's see. There we go. Okay. See, there's like 6 boxes. Just trust me. Okay, there's 6 boxes. Okay, so let's go ahead and put this down on my paper and we can get started, okay? So now that I have my paper folded and I have a little sheet here for me to write on, I'm going to go ahead and get my ink ready. And you want to be careful because obviously the ink does stain everything. So you really, really want to make sure that you're on a clean surface. And we're going to just pour in a little bit. This is extra thick ink, so I'm going to have to add a little bit of water to make this a little bit more soluble and a little bit more easy to work with. So I'm going to add just a few drops of the water. Now let me do a little bit of a demo on how to hold the brush itself. Number one thing to remember is not to hold this like a pencil. So in other words, none of this kind of stuff. The brush should always remain vertical. I say that it's more like playing or holding a flute. If you see that I have my 3 fingers free here, imagine this is like I'm playing a little flute. Hold it something like that, and that's a little bit easier to work with. There's a more traditional style where you kind of hold it like this. In Chinese calligraphy, I prefer the flute style. This is, for me, a little bit more versatile, and you could even do the little pinky up if you want, okay? So let's get to our first character, which is going to be the character for day. Let me just move that off to the side. The character for day. Here we go. We're going to go to the overhead, okay. Okay, so here's my paper. I'm going to make sure to load my brush up, and I'm just going to get it completely soaked in the ink, and then I'm going to scrape it off on the sides a little bit just to get some of that excess ink off. Excuse me for a minute while I stand up. Okay, so every Chinese character has what's known as a kakijun in Japanese anyways. It's called a kakijun. It's a stroke order, and that you have to memorize. The easy characters like day aren't so difficult to memorize. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? So that is the character for day. So it's essentially 4 strokes. Let's do that again. And the key to calligraphy is to practice, practice, practice. Believe it or not, the characters that are super simple like this, that only have 4 strokes, often are much more difficult to write than the more complicated characters with lots of lines. So let's do this again. So the key to beginning your brush stroke is always to think about it as a diagonal. And then we're going to pull down, and you're going to kind of go over the end a little bit. And what you're trying to do is you're going to try to create a beginning point and an end point. In other words, none of this sort of just straight up and down. There needs to be a weight on the beginning and a weight on the end, and that'll make it seem balanced. From here, we're going to go over to the right, and then you're going to twist the brush a little bit, and that creates that little weird corner, and you're going to pull down, and again, tap, 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 and that'll create that weight on the bottom. Every single line needs that weight on both sides. Okay, this one's kind of ugly. You can see that the ink is running a little bit. So what I may do is, clean it off, clean my brush off in the on the side of the ink container here, and we can see what I'm kind of doing here. So if it gets a little too watery, I can just scrape it off a little bit. Okay, let's do another one. Here we go. And again, while I was showing you the origins of these characters was primarily so that you can keep in mind what is this character really supposed to look like? And it's supposed to look like a sun. So really think about, I know it's a rectangle or a square here, but think about that circular shape, and then also the middle part, almost as if it's like the face of the sun. Okay, there we go. And you can see there's some, deviation from each version. And the key to calligraphy is you keep writing until you get the one you like. In many cases, it's not by design. In other words, you can't sit down and go, oh, this is going to be the final one, because you don't really know that. You could make a mistake. You could make a happy mistake, as I call them, and you could create a character that you had no intention of creating that you really, really, really love. And so often you just keep writing and you keep writing and you keep writing until you find the character, or that you end up with a character that you like. I've said this before, it's almost like gymnastics. When you're doing, let's say, a tumbling routine, you have to hit all of the little marks and you have to do the things at the right time, and then you have to stick the landing in order to make a perfect routine. And it's very much the same way with calligraphy. You could see here's kind of my examples here. Okay, and you just keep practicing and you try to find out which one looks better than the rest. I might say maybe this one. I kind of like that one. And let's do this one more time, okay? I'd like to do this one more time with you. Let me get another piece of paper. Excuse me. Maybe I should edit that out. I'm going to stick this down here. Again, I also, when I put down a new piece of paper, because it's been folded up and that kind of thing, I kind of smooth it out with my hand. Some people use their paperweight to smooth it out, but I find that this will erase the creases a little too much. So I just use my hand just very lightly. Let's go back over to the overhead now, and we're going to do one more set. Let's do one more set. And you know, when you first start learning a character, when you first encounter a character, I might practice it, I don't know, 50 times maybe before I get it really, really good, right? So again, the beginning and the weight at the beginning and the weight at the end. I'm going to twist the brush here to create the little corner, and you pull down and then tap, tap, tap. Let's tap, 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 tap. And you'll notice that these little tap, tap, taps are creating these interesting, what are called serifs in Western script. And those kind of help you, again, it makes it look balanced, right? The camera's kind of in my way, so I keep kind of pulling over to the left a little bit here. I'm going to move back into the center. Tap, tap, tap. Twist your brush to create the little corner and pull down. And tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap here. I'm going to create the middle, the face of the sun. There we go. Not bad. And you know what, when you're first starting out with this, don't worry, just, you know, do your own style. That's the thing that's nice about these. Once you follow the rules, the basic rules, which are the stroke order, right? Which strokes go first. As long as you follow that and you got the basic shape, you can add your own style to these. They don't have to look exactly like mine do, or another example that you might find in a book. It's really hard to get characters to look like, you know, completely perfect, because again, these things take, or that type of skill takes at least a decade. Even if you're a native speaker and you've been writing kanji your entire life, handling the brush and working with ink and composition and balance, all these things, thinking about all these things at once can be very, very, very challenging. I think actually, as I'm speaking now, you know, I think my characters are suffering a little bit because I'm not concentrating. Normally I would be concentrating very hard and to make sure that everything is very pretty, that, you know, the beginnings and the ends. You'll notice that if you see these little sharp ends here, they're all pointing in the same angle. And that's what you want to get or do basically to make all the characters look like they belong together. Almost like if you were to think about it in the terms of like they belong to the same font. You know what I mean? Like you're creating a font style, and you want to make sure that they all sort of match that same character. There's, when you're doing these things also, there's a sort of balance you need to make also with, let me go to the, let's go to the, excuse me, go here. I wanted to talk about the balance. Move this out of the way. I want to talk about you know, the balance. When you're doing these things, you want to make sure, again, that they look like they all belong together, so that you're going to do certain thematic parts. So that, for example, let me see if I can point to this. So if you've got this little pointed end, you want to make sure that all of the angles match. You want to make sure that all of the little corners here match, and that your lines match, and so that they look like they belong together. What is difficult about this is when you start adding new characters into this, it's like a kind of a puzzle. How do I get them to match? What kind of styles can I add to them to get them to match? But for right now, just focus on your own style. That's what's important. So let's move now to the next character in the set that I was going to teach you, and that is the character for water. Let me get a piece of paper out. All right, I should probably put that somewhere else, huh? All right, so let's go to the overhead again. Excusez-moi. All right, there we go. Now, sweet. Oh, God, I love this character. And man, oh, man, this is a very, very basic Chinese character, but man, oh, man, have I spent a long time trying to get this thing down. I mean, it's very difficult character. And the reason why is because it has so few stroke order, so few strokes, and the stroke order is relatively easy, but it's the composition and the balance. It's just so hard to get. So we're going to start with the central line. We're going to get, again, match that same angle I was talking about. You're going to pat, 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 and flick, and then that gives you that lovely little tail. So now we're going to create the other side, create a little corner, and flick. Okay, now we're going to create this section here by pulling up and then flicking back, and that'll create that lovely little edge right there, that little sharp point. And then here is the difficult part, you creating a little interesting tail. So I'm going to pull down, tap, 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 and then I'm going to change the angle of the brush by rotating and then pull. And that'll give you that characteristic, I call it like a boot almost, a boot looking tail, for example. I'm not sure how to explain it. Let's do that one more time. Okay? We're going to begin like we always do with the same angle at the beginning. You're going to tap, 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 and then lightly flick up, and that'll give you the tail at the end. Again, there's a weight here and a weight here. Everything needs to be weighted. If you don't weight the top and you weight the bottom, then it'll look like, you know, somebody with really big feet or something. You need a head and you need feet. They balance each other out. So let's do this section here. So again, thinking about that same angle, right? That same angle, pull and flick. We're going to push up on this one and flick back. And here we're going to tap, 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 change direction, and pull out lightly. Okay? These are a little bit messy. You know, again, I'm chit-chatting while I'm doing this, and I'm not quite used to it. I'm getting there. Let's do it one more time. And the stroke order on this again is 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? You could see this one, the little tail here might be a little too long. These should be kind of identical. So I don't mind pointing out my little mistakes so that you could see what I'm doing wrong so that you don't have to do the same thing, okay? Here we go, one more time. Flick, and down. And, you know, once you've got the kakijun, the stroke order down, you can go a little bit faster. You'll notice that when you go a little faster, the lines or the strokes become a little bit more expressive. I find them to be more expressive. You could also see when I do this edge, when I go quickly, I can get a nice, beautiful edge right here. When I go slowly, it's much more difficult, right? So it's kind of, on top of everything else, it's a balance between going fast and going slow. And those things, you can only really discover them. That is when to go fast and when to go slow. You can only discover them through practice. So the big key to all this is practice, 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 okay? So there are some of my, let's sit down here really quick, go back to my base camera. So there we are with my waters. I would give myself a C+. Again, I haven't warmed up. I was going back to my gymnastics analogy earlier, you know, where you have to do your tumbling routine and stick the landing and everything. Part of that whole gymnastics routine is warming up. So I should probably, before I get on camera, start warming up a little bit. Okay, so I don't want to go over that again. So let's do the next character, which is the character for gold. It's material I really love. So I like this character also. And it's actually really, really fun to write also. Let's go ahead and stick this here. Now this one has more strokes to it, so you may want to slow down the video if you get lost and go over the stroke order. This is one of the characters that if you change the stroke order a little bit, it's not going to make the whole thing look weird, but if you change it too much, yeah, you're not going to be able to get it to look like the original character. Remember, we're not drawing. We are writing. This is writing. So there's a there's a system here. Could you imagine, writing a full English sentence and you start with one letter here and you write one letter there, and it has to be written in a system, right, in order for it to look legible. So it's the same thing here. So let's go ahead and go back to the overhead cam. Oh, sorry about that. All right, so the trick, I'm gonna, as you could see, maybe a little bit, it's getting a little thick for my liking. So I'm gonna take my little water pot and I'm gonna just a few drops. You don't wanna put too much water because it does dilute very quickly, okay? So here we go, I'm gonna just scrape off the excess. All right, so the reason why, or the hardest part of this character really is at the top, the mountain top, right, that we saw earlier. So what we're going to do is begin by going like that and then flick, and that creates one side. And then just like that other stroke I was showing you where you change the angle and you create the little boot foot. Okay, now we're going to create a single line here and pull down here. You want to make sure the center line is roughly the same size as that. Now here goes the 2 little nuggets of gold. And I'll teach you a little bit more about how to do these little flicks. But they want to look like they attach, you know what I mean? So this is going to attach like that. But it's not attached. But they need to look like they attach. And then we're going to do the bottom. Okay? So that's gold. And again, the 2 little nuggets underneath the mountaintop. That's what the original pictograph was. Okay, here we go. I'm going to flick back and flick forward. And often I've seen, you know, people who make this really stylish and they make this top quite large. So maybe I'm making mine a little too big. Pulling down, make sure to tap, tap, tap so that you have the weights on both sides. The middle one should be a little bit, you know, about the same size or the same width as the top. And this one, you're going to pull down and flick up. And then imagine there's an imaginary line here, and then it goes like that. So that they're actually kind of almost speaking to each other. And then the bottom, okay? Ooh, that one's kind of ugly, yeah? Here we go. Let me just be quiet and see if I could do a prettier one. There we go. Down. Let's do our little nuggets of gold. And last one. Beautiful. Much better. Okay. So as you can see, I'm still getting used to chit-chatting on camera. There we go. And again, it's also it's a matter of speed versus slowing down, right? You'll see often in traditional Chinese calligraphy, the calligraphers often go very, very slowly, and they really take a long time to construct their shapes, the shapes of their strokes. Japanese calligraphy, I would say, is a little bit more focused on speed and not using the brush to achieve those shapes quickly, rather than creating or almost painting the shapes in by, you know, by like doing fancy brush maneuvers or taking your time. So for example, what I mean by that, let me show you what I mean. So in Japanese calligraphy, it might a single line might look something like that, right? Very quick. But in Chinese calligraphy, when they go very, very slowly, it's constructed in almost like 8 pieces. So you kind of go up, move around, and you're creating these by lots of little movements rather than one single movement. So there you have it. This is the character for gold, one of my favorites. This character is a component character, also known as a radical. That means that this character can be combined with other radical characters to create more complicated kanji characters. So it's important to learn these basic characters, and then you can go into the more complicated ones. So let's go to the base. That's it, basically. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I have more content coming out in relation to calligraphy, a little bit of a preview. This is what we will be working on next time, so please check in again at SCMA Play on our website. We also have Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, so check us out. Thanks a lot.